Thank you guys so much. That was so cool. So now, he's going to change hats and chairs. Dennis.
If you're not entertained today, you never will be. In fact, it's so good, I don't need any jokes. I usually have little jokes that I tell. The joke is me. You'll see what I mean. I want to start off with this wonderful book that if you've never read it or purchased it, please do. It's called The Tao Te Ching, and that's pronounced T-A-O. Taoism is spelled with a T. The Tao Te Ching, and most people believe it was written by a man named Lao Tzu, but there's some debate about that. Because just like in the time of Christ didn't write any of his own gospels or anything like that, his disciples may very well have been the ones that wrote this book. What I love about it is it's so minimalist. Most of this first part is all introduction. All the way up to here is introduction to the book. The actual Tao Te Ching might be 50 pages long. And yet it says everything that I could ever want to think or say about life. And I'll give you a few examples. Every time I speak, I ask myself this fundamental question. How am I going to reconcile the Tao with my speaking? And I'll share with you in a moment what I mean. The theme for December for Centers for Spiritual Living is celebrating science of mind through the holy days. So we would be well to spend our time examining our thoughts deeply, adjusting and fine-tuning them as needed to have us be in greater alignment with the truth. By doing so daily, we will conclude that we are whole, perfect, and complete. Later in this talk, I'm going to be talking about Fred Rogers. If you haven't seen this astounding movie, go see it. If you aren't moved by it, nothing is going to move you, in my book. It's not so much that Tom Hanks is just an extraordinary actor and can pull these kinds of roles off. It's that Fred Rogers really was the kind of person that everybody could not believe he was. He was that person. So, one of the fundamental principles of the Tao is that, I hate this, those that talk don't know. Now you can see my dilemma. And worse than that, those that talk don't know, and those who don't know, or those who know, don't talk. So when you go to a master or a guru, or even a Fred Rogers, he never had religious kinds of sermons with people. He never needed them, because he was so authentically himself that when the interviewer asked him, "Who is Fred Rogers?" he said, "That is me." And who are you playing on TV? I don't understand your question. Because for him it wasn't an act. All right, so close your mouth, block your senses, blunt your sharpness, untie your knots, soften your glare, settle your dust. This is the primal identity. Be like the Tao. It can't be approached or withdrawn from, benefited or harmed, honored or brought into disgrace. It gives itself up continually. And this is why Taoism has existed all these years. For those that don't know, Lao Tzu lived some 300, 400, 500 years before Christ, around the time of Buddha. I don't know how many followers of Taoism there are in the world, but I would guess it's probably close to 1 billion. All right? It's very popular philosophy even today. So those that talk don't know. God, that's a hard one for me. Because then what do I tell people? That I actually know something and I'm going to impart that wisdom to you? I don't really look at it that way anymore. I used to. And it used to make me quite uncomfortable that those those that talk don't know. And then I realized, well, I'm just going to share my experience, and you interact off of that and see how that fits your experiences. One workshop leader told me many years ago, take what resonates with you and the rest, throw it out. And I've done that all my life. If it doesn't resonate with me, throw it out. So the whole focus of this talk is going to be about the word grounded. I think Kathy has talked about this word before, grounded. In the Tao, breathing is what creates grounding, and some other religions as well, Hinduism and so forth. All right, but what does it actually mean to be grounded? I have actually studied metaphysical principles and concepts for over 40 years. Wow. I must be grounded, right? And I would like to believe that I am grounded. Yet, as my wife can firsthand tell you, I am not at times. I'm more like the mental person. So we'll see later in this talk what happened to me this week to take my level of groundedness and push me in a whole nother direction that could have actually been dangerous or hazardous. So let's look at grounding from an electrical standpoint. Many years ago, in the 1980s, I thought I would become a TV repairman. No kidding. That was my goal. I went to an electronics institute. I studied electronics. I studied electronics in college, solid-state electronics. And I thought, well, this was a worthy profession. I could become a television repairman. Then one day I had an uncle come over. He said, I'm going to fix your TV. Back in those days, remember vacuum tubes? The little glass tubes? I'm going to fix your TV. He tested this, he tested that. Sure, and I said, let me do the vertical alignment. Remember when the TV used to roll? Now, if you're old enough, you know what I'm talking about. With cable TV, that almost never happens. It used to roll, and you have to go in there and adjust the thing so that it wouldn't go this way or this way so you could watch the show. Very annoying, by the way. So he looked at it, he changed some tubes out. He says, I found a few bad ones in there, and we're going to replace them. He says, my advice to you is don't go into TV repair. And I said, how come? He said, two reasons. Number one, you are constantly going to be studying. You're never not going to be studying because things in the world in the 70s and 80s when I was looking at this, they're changing so rapidly. I don't know if you remember this, but vacuum tubes went out around the 60s and 70s, and what you found were transistors, which basically did the same thing as a vacuum tube. And all of our products, I swear to God, were coming from Japan. Not Korea and not China, Japan. They had the lock on the market, on the US market. And so transistors were like a transcendent kind of thing for many people. How did they work? What could you do with them? I was watching an episode of Leave It to Beaver. I laughed. Leave It to Beaver. On that episode, the winning prize in the contest he was involved in was a transistor radio. And I was like, wow! It was like the most amazing thing. Well, little did they know that by the 1980s, IC stands for what, people? Integrated circuits demolished transistors. Didn't need them anymore. What they would do is use these micro, super small things and they put the transistor wiring into the integrated circuits. So today, when you go and get a television repaired, forget about figuring out what's wrong with it. Pull the whole damn circuit board out, put a new one in, if you're willing. All right? So I'm very thankful for this uncle telling me that this wasn't going to work. By the way, as a side note, I duplicated something. Probably not all of you can see it. I'm going to show it to you like this. You know what this is, huh? Okay, it's not a diode.
Not a resistor.
It's a resistor. And the reason I'm showing this to you is a couple of weeks ago, I don't remember who who was speaking, but they were talking about rainbows and the color code and rainbows. Remember Roy G. Biv? How many of you remember that? Roy G. Biv? Well, it turns out that in electronics they've incorporated all this stuff into electronics. So the color code for this resistor can actually be read by looking at the code here. In this case, this is a 5, this is a 6. The reason that this is a 5 and this is a 6 is because 0 and 1 had no placeholders. So they gave them black and brown. Those were the placeholders. So this can actually be read as 5, 6, 2 zeros on the end. This is a 5,600 ohm OHM resistor. Interesting, huh? Not interesting. Okay. It's not interesting to her.
Not even the own part?
That's very good, because you know what? It's not interesting to a lot of people that will look at that and go, so what? Some of you may have it sharp enough to notice there's another band right here.
Yes.
The gold band stands for the tolerance. So this is the tolerance plus or minus 5% of this value. Why is this important? Because when you're going to outer space, you don't want a 5%. You want a 1/10 of 1%, which they have, by the way. Otherwise, you may not get there and back. Alright? And yes, they did use resistors, and they did use Commodore 64 machines to get to the moon. That is not a joke.
No.
That is for real. Alright? That's interesting. Alright. Well, we're still on the topic of grounding, so now we're going to get into, still on the topic of grounding, but it's going to get more interesting. In the 1900s, homes were wired like this. You had electricity coming in, you had a light bulb, you had a light bulb, you had an iron. They were all lined one after the other. Much like when you stand up in a circle and you connect hands, we call that series. Can you say that word? Series. The problem, there was a huge problem with series connections. And that is, if this one here goes out, they all go out. Now, if you've had Christmas tree lights, the older kind, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Right? So, homes are wired today in what's called parallel, where it is like this. I have 2 leads connecting to this person here, so if one breaks, we're still connected. Trust me, this is all going to make sense. Secondarily, something else happened. How many of you have looked at a plug and said to yourself, damn, that plug has 3 prongs on it? Okay, I mean, sure. Many of us have seen plugs that are a larger voltage appliance or whatever that has 3 prongs. Do you know what the middle one is for?
Grounding.
The middle one is for grounding. But do you know how that grounding works? When the house is built, they tap a wire through a stake or the water lines to the water line or a stake to ground the home. And that's the reason you don't get shocked normally with those kinds of plugs. Now, if you have older kind of plugs, you might notice something kind of weird over the last 20 years. One side is thicker than the other. Anybody notice that?
Yeah.
That's a relatively new development. When I was a kid, both sides were the same. It didn't make a difference what way you turned it, it would go in. Now, one side is a little thicker. It won't go in unless you stick it in the exact right way. That's also a form of grounding. So what does all this have to do with anything metaphysical? Well, I want to first explain to you what happens when something is not grounded. 2 things happen. You either get electrocuted, all right, or you have a fire and it burns your house. And this was very common in the 1900s, that houses would burn down because they weren't grounded. They weren't electrically sound. And then building codes came into place, and now we probably have too much building codes, Kathy. You know, but in any event, that was the reason for that. So, what do you think would happen to you if you were not grounded?
Fall down.
Okay, anybody tried walking in wet cement in their bare feet? Okay, it can be done, but if there's an electrical appliance in the room that you're walking on, you're likely going to get shocked. All right? So you and I, just like this whole little dialogue that hopefully was somewhat humorous that we had about grounding, you and I must also be grounded. If we're not grounded, we're going to fly off the handle. Now, I'm going to prove that to you because I did that twice this week. I'm going to go with the more benign one. Okay? If you're traveling up the road towards Mountain View, you're going to hit a point just before Kamehameha School where the road verges into one. Some of you know what I'm talking about. There are other places on the island. In fact, there's one up here too where it merges into one. All right? What often happens is people in the left-hand lane will intentionally go 60 to 70 miles an hour to get to the front of the line. It's so important to get to the front of the line. And then they will beg people to let them in. Or, if they're not going to beg, they'll force their way in. So, I don't know about you, but every time that this happens for me, I get ungrounded. I get annoyed. Big time. And in my mind, my thought process is, they shouldn't be doing that. They know better. Why are they rushing their cars up the left-hand side of the road only to have it messed up for everybody else that's staying on the right side? So that's the first thing. I called my brother about that, by the way. And he said, you know, Dennis, a couple years ago, my brother lives in Mountain View. He says, a couple years ago, I intentionally tried to keep somebody from getting over. He said, it turned out to be a big mother contractor guy, huge. And this guy followed him all the way up to J. Hara's store. And he said, at that point, I realized it's not worth it. So he said, he says, I advise you to do this too. When somebody is behind me or wanting to go, I let them go. I pull off to the side. If they want to pass me, fine, go for it. You know. The second incident was not benign. We are close to McDonald's, us in the car. I'm in the middle lane. Are you guys with this story? Am I boring you? Okay. All right. Just making sure. You're gonna laugh in a minute. I'm in the middle lane. And I'm driving along towards McDonald's in the middle lane. There is a clear lane on this side, but I don't know if anybody's in that lane. Okay? I really don't know. All of a sudden, this jacked up truck, you know when they jack up their trucks? He cuts, and it's a he cuts right in front of me and basically takes me off the road. And so I veer like this to avoid getting killed, but potentially killing my wife if somebody had been there. I was irate. And my first words were, I'm not taking this anymore. That's it. I'm sick and tired of being stepped on and squashed. I'm not taking this anymore. Which led me to decision number 2. I could see his truck going down the road, swerving in and out. I decided I'm going to catch up to this guy. I'm going to let him know that I didn't appreciate being cut off the road. So I did catch up to him, and I blasted my horn for a full 30 seconds. I can see this guy like this. He can't figure out where the blast is coming from because he's so high up, and I'm down here on his right-hand side. All the while, my wife is saying, what's wrong with you? What is wrong with you? So you see, you can have a high degree of grounding. You can spend 40 years of your life in metaphysical stuff, and in a split second, forget all of it. I'm laughing at it when I was saying those words. I'm not taking this anymore. I pat him up. I'm like, who are you talking to? What? Who are you talking to, man? It was that stupid, honestly. But in any event, nothing happened. Something could have happened. In this day and age, people have been known to run other people off the road, take out a gun, shoot them, any number of things. So, that was really dumb. And that to me was an exercise of how far off the grounding I can be, even when I think I'm grounded. So, there's a couple of principles I've lived by for a long time. Not on that day. The first one is everything is in divine order. That's a principle from the Course in Miracles. I believe that principle wholeheartedly, that my life, the opportunities, the lack of opportunities, everything, breaking a hip, anything that happens to me is somehow in divine order. I just don't know it at the time, most of the time. The second thing, and I told this to somebody here earlier, I'm never upset for the reasons that I think I am. What pissed me off about this guy had nothing to do with this guy. It had to do with, as somebody said earlier, disrespect. Non-apologetic disrespect. And that triggered some file in my brain that went and said, okay, I'm taking action. I'm not taking this anymore.
You're good.
Believe me, I know it's dumb. And the third is that there is only the illusion of other. I really want you to get this, because I say it all the time, but I know what this means. There is only the illusion of other. There is no other there. It's all me. And the people in my space, including this truck driver, this is the worst part because I know this, he's a manifestation of me. Maybe I've done that to somebody and didn't even know that I did it.
Maybe you did while you were chasing it.
Maybe. So, you and I are creative beings, and every single moment we are creating our reality. The reality that we see out here, it just doesn't happen by accident. It's a manifestation of what we're creating. And therefore, for me to get angry at somebody for what I perceive to be running me off the road is kind of stupid, since I'm the one that probably created that. So I want to talk just a little bit about the movie. How many of you have seen the movie? I don't want to give it away for anybody that hasn't seen it, so yeah, I know. Oh, it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. It's the life story of Fred Rogers. Not the life story, that's wrong. It's the story of Fred Rogers. The neat thing about this movie is it doesn't focus on Fred Rogers. It was such a unique approach to making this movie. Somebody was invited to write a 500-word article about Fred Rogers. And this writer had a very bad reputation of ripping the hell out of people. He was nasty. Nobody wanted to have him interview them. So he goes and sees Fred Rogers, and he can't make up his mind whether this guy's a phony or whether he's for real. He just can't. The guy looks too sweet. He looks too humble. But I'll tell you something that happened right away that kind of piqued his interest. He remembered names. He remembered faces. He remembered illnesses. I can't tell you how many times I meet people and I'm dumbfounded as to what their name is. I got to make an algorithm in my head to remember what their name is, not with him. All right, so through his interaction with this guy, he has a chance to heal his relationship with his father who is dying. Don't want to say any more. Is that what you're saying? Okay. But in any event, I think Tom Hanks did an incredible study on Fred Rogers. Really do. to be able to capture not only his mannerisms, but his contemplative way of talking. The thing that I admired so much, and I think it is true of Fred Rogers himself, is he always had time for people. You know, how often do you and I feel like we're in a rush and we don't have time for people? You know, we don't want to make time for people. Or we want to avoid them. You know, and so that's a common theme in America today, is that people always feel like they're so busy they don't have time. They don't have time. Fred Rogers always had time. He didn't drive to work. He rode the bus or the subway to work. And interestingly enough, he had 2 sons. The oldest son never talked about his dad and what he did. He was ashamed. And the youngest son was kind of a rebel. So Fred Rogers didn't have it easy. But there's one thing that he did that I'd like all of you to consider doing. He took the time each day, 1 minute, to be grateful for everybody in his life. And he would name them, for my mother, for my wife, for Cecilia, whatever the names were. He took the time to be grateful for people in his life. And in this community, we only hang together by being grateful for each other. That's how we hang together. And even if we don't like what somebody does or doesn't do, we can still find a way to be grateful for them. As one professor told me, you know, there's always a nice way to say something to somebody. Like if somebody has bad breath. How is there a nice way to say that? But there is. I don't want to think it up right now. but there is a nice way to say that and to be supportive. So.
Would you like a Tic Tac?
There you go. So I'm going to conclude this talk right on time. And you know what? I took my bookmark out when I moved that, so I'm not going to read that. But I do invite you to get. Okay, I do invite you to get the book if you've not read it before. And I am done. Mahalo.
Don't go so far. Okay, now it's time for conscious giving. So please take your treasure in your hands and repeat after me. Divine love, in and through me, blesses and multiplies, all that I have, all that I give, all that I receive, and all that I am. And so it is.